Okay, hello and welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today on this beautiful Friday. We are excited to be here to talk about on the front lines, utilizing the Universal Service Fund to support K-12 cybersecurity. I'm going to take down this beautiful slide and introduce myself. I'm Michael Klein. I am the Senior Director for Preparedness Response here at IST. And most recently, I was at the US Department of Education, where I was the senior advisor for cybersecurity. And what brings us here today is a really important topic that we're excited to dive into with some experts in the field. And so here, as some background, just a couple of weeks ago on June 27th, the Supreme Court ruled that the FCC's Universal Service Fund, or USF, which is a telecom fee-based mechanism that allows all Americans to have affordable access to communications, was constitutional. And as soon as that came down, within hours, leaders in the House on the Energy and Commerce Committee announced plans to reauthorize USF. And so for those of us who are attuned to this kind of a challenge facing K-12 schools, and we're thinking about cybersecurity, these two events together raised an important question for us, which we're going to dive into today, which is, what's to become of the FCC's cybersecurity pilot? And so for some context on that, last year, the FCC finalized a pilot program that's intended to help E-rate eligible schools. And so that's schools and districts across the United States in every community to improve their cybersecurity by giving them access to a broader array of subsidized tools and services than they were usually able to get. The program was so popular, it was wildly oversubscribed. So it's a $200 million program that saw about $3 billion worth of requests. And the funds have been allocated to help educators start to mitigate those threats. And as part of our work at IST to bolster K-12 cybersecurity, we decided to investigate how the pilot is working so far with districts that are part of it, as well as what other options policymakers might consider as they look to update the USF. And the last point I'll make before introducing our amazing panelists is that this particular program, the FCC's Universal Service Fund, is uniquely positioned to address these challenges, especially the scourge that's really been hitting our school districts over the last 5 years intensely, which is ransomware, right? Disruptive attacks on school district networks that are funded through E-rate that disrupt operations, can shut down schools, can make students' data available to those that shouldn't have it, all the way up to the most recent incidents like the Power School incident, which impacted 60 million students and 10 million teachers, down to the experiences of many districts that we've seen across the country where their networks have been locked and they've been closed for days and even weeks, stopping students from getting the education that they need, and then costing the district an incredible amount of money in recovery. And so this program can really support those challenges. And so with that, I'm really excited to introduce our esteemed panelists. So I think we'll start with Vince. Vince, can you introduce yourself for us?
Yeah, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, IST, for having us here today. I'm Vince Voci, Director of Global Government Affairs and Partnerships for Cloudflare. And I joined Cloudflare 4 months ago. Previously, I was the head of global cyber policy for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, serving as its vice president. So thanks again, Mike.
Awesome. Amy, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi. Thank you. Thanks for having us here today. I'm Amy McLaughlin. I am the cybersecurity subject matter expert and project director for the Consortium of School Networking, or CoSN, which is an association, a professional association for school district technology leaders. And we basically provide resources, tools, and advocacy to help school districts navigate digital transformation. I'm also a former state E-rate coordinator, so I've been in the E-rate business for a while.
Beautiful. And then so zooming into the level of the district, Raghu, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Michael. My name is Raghu Seshadri. I work for Jefferson County Public Schools in Louisville, Kentucky. We have 100,000 students and about 18,000 staff members. As of January this year, I've been responsible for the cybersecurity program. It includes all areas of detection, monitoring, remediation, awareness. So it's an exciting opportunity, and I'm excited about this grant. So thank you very much.
Wonderful. And so just to frame for our listeners, we're going to have a four-part conversation. So we're going to start by discussing threats to K-12 and why we're here, what's the challenge we're facing. In the second part, we'll discuss USF, what is the Universal Service Fund, what purposes does it serve. Then we'll dive into the cybersecurity pilot that's ongoing. So we're kind of going wide, narrow, narrow, and then we'll get specific about policy considerations as Congress is thinking of taking up this legislation again. So to kick us off, Vince, you've been in the cybersecurity community for a while now. Can you talk to us a little bit about the threats that you're seeing to K-12 and more broadly to help give us a sense and set the scene for us?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Mike. And I'll probably start with that wide to narrow lens as well. So some wave tops on global cyber threats. First, I like to look to thought leaders for some of their expertise. So mentioning other vendors, which I like to do, Sandra Joyce at Mandiant, Wendy Whitmore at Palo Alto, Adam Myers at CrowdStrike. These guys are awesome. They have amazing insights from decades of experience on the enterprise and OT side, really interesting insights year over year. On the OT side, Rob Lee, Dragos, just no one better in the world than some of the things that he has to say. Dive in, APT actors like Russia, China, North Korea are increasingly targeting critical infrastructure with increasingly sophisticated and persistent campaigns. Volt, Salt, the Typhoons are great examples of those. While zero-day exploits, man-in-the-middle attacks, living off the land intrusions certainly garner a lot of attention, phishing remains the most dominant initial vector. Cloudflare sees about 90% of successful intrusions start with an email campaign of some sorts, which can lead to the ransomware that we see against critical infrastructure and schools, which continues to be a global threat to all stakeholders. Another really interesting insight that I find year over year from CrowdStrike is their assessment on the breakout time from initial intrusions to lateral movements and escalations down into like 13 to 15 seconds in some cases now. So where does Cloudflare fit into this whole equation? For those that aren't familiar with us, we're a leading cloud connectivity company on a mission to build a better internet. 15 years ago, Cloudflare started building what is today one of the world's largest and most interconnected networks today that has a data processing capacity of nearly 400 terabits per second, serving nearly 40 million customers, spanning 330 cities across 130 countries. We're used as a reverse proxy for about 20% of the globe's websites. So what does that enable us to do at a very strategic perspective? Cloudflare has a common level of visibility across the globe that has allowed us to put in place a common level of controls and protections to protect web applications. We process nearly 4.3 trillion DNS queries per day. And that's roughly 49 million DNS queries per second. We block, on average, 247 billion cyber threats per day. So what are some of those cyber threats from our year-over-year analysis? Number one, that's DDoS attacks. DDoS, distributed denial of service attacks, remain the largest threat factor for web applications and APIs. It represents almost 35% of application traffic mitigated by Cloudflare. And in the first quarter of this year, we blocked two of the world's largest DDoS attacks ever recorded. And we continue to see year over year, double-digit, triple-digit increases in DDoS attacks. Looking back over last year, just in this first quarter of 25, we blocked the same amount of DDoS attacks. Secondly, bot traffic, roughly 1/3 of internet traffic stems from bots, with nearly 90% of that being unverified and potentially malicious bot traffic. Malicious bots can lead to credential stuffing, data scraping, inventory hoarding, and DDoS attacks. Cloudflare made a pretty significant announcement on crawling, AI crawling last week. If you haven't had a chance to check it out, check out our blog on that. Third, we're seeing much faster exploitation of vulnerabilities. Last year, we observed a zero-day being exploited 22 minutes after its proof of concept was published, and we're continuing to see that go faster and faster. Fourth, we're continuing to see software and third-party dependency exploitations. The great example of this is Log4j, discovered in 21, continues to be a persistent threat. Software is going to continue to be exploited as the digital economy is increasingly using it. And then lastly, a few minutes on email threats. We, over last year, saw almost 5% of nearly 13 billion emails contained malicious information. Top attack vectors and targets would include deceptive links. We found that nearly 35% of phishing emails contain a deceptive link, trying to send users to a malicious website or download something. A lot of brand impersonation, identity and deception, and nearly 50% of emails in January, phishing emails in January, we found contain malicious attachments. For more information on this, check out our Radar blog, radar.cloudflare.com.
Vince, you have touched on so many topics here. Thank you so much for covering like the full waterfront, which is so helpful for policymakers to understand the kind of full threat space. And now I'd like to zoom in a little bit with a minute of framing from me and then tossing to you, Raghu. I can say from my experience, having been an IT director in a school district, I know that some of the things that Vince mentioned that are specifically challenging for us were things like phishing, right? Social engineering as a way of getting into the network and getting into email accounts and other things like that. Valid credentials, right? So people's usernames and passwords are shared or used across or available in data breaches, and easy for a threat actor to get in with those valid credentials. And then the last one was like unpatched vulnerabilities, specifically the vulnerabilities on our network that are touching the internet and that are already exploitable, right? Those are kind of three of the big things I was worried about. And we know that there are roughly 5 incidents a week affecting K-12 schools. Not all of them are ransomware, but we have lots of challenges. So I want to toss to you, Raghu, as someone who spends every day defending a large K-12 network, what resonates from Vince's perspective, and what would you add or emphasize in terms of what wakes you up at 3 a.m?
Thank you, Michael. I agree with everything Vince mentioned. They're all, to me, they're all APTs. I classify them all as APTs because they occur every day. And they're getting more sophisticated. And let's not forget, a lot of the social engineering and everything is being done now is also having some kind of an AI backend that people use to make it more authentic. It used to be like, oh, you have a spelling mistake, this, that, and the other. Now they're crafted so well that you can become Microsoft. So that's one of the biggest things. And obviously ransomware is one thing that's always happening. The other thing is third-party risk. You have vendors that provide services that have access to information, and they are usually trusted in your domain. So risks are coming from them. They get compromised, so they don't have to compromise you. They can use someone else that's compromised that has access to your information and get to you. And that's something we're noticing increasingly. And it's not just about disrupting services, it's about actually trying to get information through brute force. And these are some of the really advanced techniques people are using. And one of the biggest challenges we have in K-12 is the mindset. The mindset is K-12 welcomes everybody. No matter who you are, you're going to get educated, you're going to be protected while you're at the school system, and they're going to take care of you. So it's very hard for those people to get from that mindset to suddenly detect a threat. So this is one of the challenges. How do we train people to have that mindfulness approach to detecting these threats and acting accordingly? So it's a very big challenge. You're essentially taking them from what they're specialized to do something that's not normal for them to do. And unfortunately, that's important, that's required, because you have a gold mine of information that's untapped. And no one will know until the kid is 18, because there's no legal requirement, to the best of my knowledge, that you have to track credit and you have to monitor the identities of kids unless you pay for it. So to me, you can become somebody until they're 18 and no one knows about it. So I think we have a moral obligation as a school district to kind of look at all facets of students' life and their information, and everything that Vince mentioned is the top of the list. And these things, to me, the biggest thing that worries me is when a kid graduates, did we tank their credit score? Did we tank their identity to a point where they don't know someone else has become them? And that worries me a lot. It worries me, yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think to build on what you were saying, um, one thing that you have specifically in your district, and I think you'll speak to this in a little bit, is a dedicated person and even team now focused on cybersecurity, right? You're a large school district with almost 200,000 students, but that's pretty rare within K-12. When we think about what K-12 looks like, we have roughly 14,000 school districts in our country, and about 70% of those districts have 2,500 students or fewer. They might have one person doing IT, or in many places, like in Oregon, where the median size of district is about 600 students, you might have the superintendent who drives the bus on the weekend, or who drives the bus and also fixes printers on the weekend, right? So you have like one person wearing many, many hats. And so they probably weren't trained in cybersecurity, right? And so they're really just trying to pick up as much as they can. And this is where programs that can provide funding and capacity building are such a huge help for those school districts that might be struggling there. And so with that, I want to toss to you, Amy. So you support IT district leaders across the country. Can you share with the audience how E-rate has supported the improvement of robust broadband capacity in large and small districts, and what might have been missing in the E-rate program when it comes to cybersecurity?
Yeah, thanks, Michael. The E-rate program has been around for a long time. It actually started with telecommunications, like making sure schools had telephones and libraries as well. I don't want to leave libraries out of the equation here. And I think what happened over time is that as internet became the primary communications asset for schools and districts, E-rate basically started funding network connectivity, broadband internet connectivity, and the hardware infrastructure to support that. So if you want to nerd out for half a moment, switches, routers, basic firewalls that put a barrier between you and the outside world. And I'm going to be really clear, basic firewalls, rule-based, no fancy capabilities to actually detect anything other than traffic you did or didn't explicitly say could come in and out. So, and that program has been essential to really expanding connectivity to schools and districts, especially in underserved and rural communities. The cost of getting high-speed internet out to a rural community can be extremely expensive. As an E-rate coordinator, I once worked on a $1.2 million project to build a fiber connection from Klamath Falls to Paisley, which is at the time had a school population of 126 students. Not something the district itself or its constituent region could support by itself without the ability to use E-rate funding. So it really helps equalize the playing field, helps rural communities stay more connected to the rest of the world, and opens up educational opportunities. If you're a student at a school that has maybe 126 students in K-12, and you want to take advanced calculus, online learning is the way you're going to do that in most cases, because it's going to be rare to find an advanced calculus instructor. So there are some really wonderful capabilities that the E-rate program has brought to communities to really support all of our students in a more fair and equitable way. Have access that would be very difficult to provide otherwise without those financial supports. Now, of course, the internet world has changed. So one of the things where E-rate did not anticipate, I'm just going to say I'm pretty sure the program just did not anticipate at the beginning, was the sort of the downside of internet connectivity, which is cyber threats, people who are actively trying to exploit, damage, or impact in other negative ways any users, including schools and libraries and other participants. And so basically, E-rate rules had been built with, support for connectivity, right? But not support for securing that connectivity. So in a little historical note, in 2021, CoSN, along with 5 other industry groups, filed a petition, a rulemaking petition with the FCC, requesting that we add cybersecurity products and services to the E-rate discounts. That had been based off of a study that CoSN and Funds for Learning had done, where we identified some proposals based on what we could see people needed. And The lowest level proposal had been a request for $0.738 billion to support next generation firewalls. So firewalls that did more than just rule-based activities, but actually actively monitored for bad traffic, acted on that bad traffic, leverage AI capabilities to shut down attacks, stop data going out of the district that is protected data, those kinds of things. At the high end, we requested $2.3 some billion to support all layers of cybersecurity, with the notion that we have built basically, I'm going to use an old term, so don't laugh, the internet superhighway. And because we didn't build security into the E-rate program, we had basically handed the equivalent of car keys to children without a driver's license, without a test, without brakes, without seatbelts, and said, go out on the internet and do things. So you can see that analogy is kind of problematic. It really highlights the sort of danger of not securing that environment. And so, and of course, one of the things that I think has come out of this pilot project has been the overwhelming demand, right? The pilot project itself was for $200 million, and they got $3.7 billion of requests. So I think it's, it really speaks to how much we really need support and capability for cybersecurity in school districts of all sizes.
Thanks so much for that, Amy. And I'm going to make a couple brief comments on my experience in my district and then toss it to Raghu to really zoom in on the pilot itself. So in my district, I was in a rural district in Connecticut. We had about 2,500 students. And in some ways, I was fortunate enough when I walked in that the previous director had not spent any of the E-rate funds. And so I walked into a 5-year worth of E-rate money that I could spend in 1 year. And so I was actually able to, working with my superintendent, purchase equipment that let me replace the entire infrastructure in my school district in 1 year, switches, routers, access points, like all of those things because of this program. And specifically, my school district got an 80% discount, right? So that meant we only had to pay for 20% of the funds that we needed to make this happen because we had such a high percentage of rural low-income students, right? And this program really does benefit those who have the least the most, right? It is structured in such a way where the districts that have the least capacity to purchase broadband infrastructure and who are most impacted by challenges are able to get those funds in the highest percentages. And so the other thing I'll mention is we were not able to use any of the money to buy cybersecurity, and I had to go out and get special grants for that, right? And that was a challenge. And in this current environment where we're seeing a huge cliff, we're calling it the ESSER cliff, right? This is the cliff where the funding from COVID relief for 5 years is now kind of shutting off for districts. So they're having to contract a lot and think about their finances, not just in tech, but across the entire ecosystem. We've expanded dramatically, right? So COVID led us to a world where we had distance learning, online learning, emergency online learning. So we have way more devices, way more internet infrastructure, and way more technology in our schools, and less funding to deal with it. And we're also seeing some headwinds in terms of the $6 billion that's being currently withheld from districts. And then also kind of in the upcoming implementation of the big, beautiful bill, there will be some shifts as well. So we're at a time of financial challenge for districts where a program like this can really be uniquely positioned to provide that support to make sure that we can get our students the education they need. Because if you don't have the internet infrastructure and the security to protect it, then like Amy said, we're on a highway without seatbelts with kids driving, and we're not controlling who else is on the road with us, right? That's the other piece of the puzzle is we got other cars crashing into us that weren't there before, right? So it's a really challenging situation. Raghu, tell us how you are thinking about that as you dive into your pilot. Can you speak to how Jefferson County has built out E-rate, and also specifically in your context, how you're working on the cyber pilot?
Sure. Thank you, Michael. I just have a slight correction. We are 100,000 students, not 200. We have 18,000 staff members. But
sorry, I made you way bigger than you were. That's my apologies.
No,
I just think of you as being so impressive that you must have twice as many students.
It's all right. It's all right. So regarding E-rate, we've always we're over 70% free and reduced. So we've always used E-rate to benefit students. So we've done things like broadband connectivity. We've brought in hotspots where they're needed. And obviously with the ESSA funds, we did LTE connectivity because home learning was important. So given the geographic spread of the students and the schools, we have 150 plus schools. It was imperative that every student learn during the process because we were home like over a year. So E-rate has definitely helped us in all of that. And obviously with the cliff, now we're looking at, now we have surplus of devices, all say almost like 2-to-1 devices. How do we manage them? Because if kids are used to learning the way they do, we can't just take it away. So there's a long road ahead to support these kind of things. As bad as the pandemic was, it brought about some much needed transformation to education in K-12. We went away from paper, pencil to see how else are we going to make it work. It was the Apollo 13 scenario that we had to encounter, So now fast forward to the cybersecurity grant. Fortunate for us, Kentucky is set up in a slightly different way. And the Kentucky Department of Education has done a phenomenal job of setting up people for success within the state. So they actually leverage E-rate to provide internet connectivity to all school districts, 170 plus. And so they manage the external internet-facing firewall. And their CISO and their the associate commissioner, the entire team have monthly webcasts where they have a special section devoted to cybersecurity. They talk about threats. They tell people what you need to be watching out for. Because we have a mix of, we're the largest school district in Kentucky, but a lot of them are a whole lot smaller. The next biggest one is about 60,000, Fayette County. So, in our case, we went to several audits in late 2015, 2018. So we'd already embraced the NIST framework for our cybersecurity framework, and we're trying to implement the different domains within that. So the cybersecurity grant came as a blessing because we, at the time, were able to identify the gaps. So we used the grant to focus on 3 specific areas. One was to have an internal firewall to further create, instead of a monolith type system, defense in depth. So this has allowed us to procure internal firewall. We are going to, we have an RFP out for a SIM tool to gather all the information and analyze it. And then we're also looking at some logical network segmentation as part of this. So we were one of the few districts that got the full grant. So it's been tremendous benefit to us. So we hope that these 3 will set the stage. There's still a lot of gaps in other things that we're going to continue to expand, but this will give us the fundamental, the foundation to build the program and to enhance it and bring awareness. It's almost like, nobody cares the one thing that you protect that would have caused a havoc is what you're going to be, holding your head to. So I feel like a lot of this work is unsung heroes that are working behind the scenes, but this is such a crucial aspect that we never hope to be in the news because we want to be at the top to where we are protecting the information. So I think the grant has been phenomenal.
That's great. And I think I want to double click on a couple of things you said. So all of the things you mentioned would not be fundable through traditional E-rate, right? These are things that only because of the grant are you able to do that kind of work. And specifically to talk to the internal firewall, that's one of the ways to really protect the crown jewels, right? A big piece of this is you kind of segmenting off those privileged accounts in the district office and some of those pieces from the schools and other threats, right? Which in a large district like yours is tremendously important, right? And that may not be the case for a really small district that's one school, right? So you had flexibility to make that choice about what you had assessed is the most important thing, and then to build those things in. And then for folks that may not be familiar, a SIEM is essentially an opportunity to collect all of the different kinds of data and be able to analyze the threats. So now that you have a team to be able to dig into cyber, they can do some threat hunting. They can look at logs. They can go and find the challenges that are coming up, be able to analyze them instead of clicking from 15 different tools and trying to make sense of what is a really complex challenge. And then the last one, network segmentation. Again, this is building that, like you said, defense in depth, making sure that those accounts should only be able to access, and those individuals' identities should only be able to access certain things. So even if you do get someone in the front door, you minimize the harm, right? That's a big part of this, is that defense in depth piece is really not to say we're going to stop everything from getting in, but even when we assume that things have gotten in, we want to make sure that there's as little damage as possible, right? And I think that's a really important step that districts are starting to think about now, because I think we really before thought more about like a moat strategy, right? Like we're trying to keep everything out and our safe inside is going to stay safe, right? As opposed to an understanding now that that's not always the case and we need other kinds of defenses. Vince, can you talk to us a little bit about how Cloudflare has been doing here? We know that Cloudflare has been at the forefront of providing tools for K-12 schools to address cyber challenges. Can you share a little bit about what school systems should be doing to protect themselves and why some of the capabilities outlined in the cyber pilot are important?
Yeah, absolutely. And Raghu, thanks for mentioning the NIST framework. Like my former chamber colleague would love that. So we're big fans of it. As I think many of you know, Cloudflare is on a mission to build a better internet for everyone, protecting people and organizations who otherwise might not have the resources to protect themselves from cyber attacks is foundational to some of our impact work. So over the past 14 years, Cloudflare has been developing different impact projects. Galileo protects non-governmental organizations. Athenian protects state and local infrastructure. Cloudflare Campaigns protects elections and specifically campaigns, candidate campaigns. We've got a healthcare project, but Project Safe Cyber Safe Schools is one that I want to put a fine point on. So under this program, Cloudflare provides Gateway DNS and Cloudflare cloud email security services to eligible school districts at no cost with no time limit. These technologies can provide a mechanism for meeting some compliance requirements under the Children's Internet Protection Act. And to be eligible for this, it's K through 12 public schools located in the United States that have enrolled no more than 2,500 students. To date, and this we launched with ONCD, the Office of the National Cyber Director, 2 years ago. I'm really proud that over 210 districts from 30 states have enrolled in this program, which is completely free. And we're currently projecting 250,000 users, including teachers, students, and administrators. So that's the CloudSec security program and DNS filtering program. Just to build off of some of the other programs that are eligible under the FCC pilot program, Cloudflare provides a protective DNS service. And this is a security offering that is really foundational to who Cloudflare is as a company. DNS company first and foremost, CDN company first and foremost, migrating into increasingly zero trust services. So how this works, how our PDNS program works, and this is what we do with CISA, the Department of Commerce, and a few other agencies outside of the United States. Number one, we provide DNS resolution. Type in a website, google.com, into a browser, computer sends your query to a resolver. They translate that into an IP address that and understand. So got DNS at resolution. When you put that Cloudflare gateway in front of you or between you and the open internet, Cloudflare services intercepts these queries. We compare that to domain name registrars and associated IP addresses. We look for malicious activity and we prevent and we block it, matching our known intelligence databases. Secondly, as Amy was talking about, we do some policy-based blocking. We can configure networks so that students or administrators, if you're a certain person and you're allowed certain contact, we can put those both policy and those content filtering policies in place to ensure that only authorized users are accessing content that they are approved. So no gambling sites, no adult content, to make this safe for educators. And then lastly, we encrypt all of the inbound and outbound queries, either over HTTPS and TLS 1.3, before anyone asks. Most of these handshakes now are secured and post-quantum ready for today. So PDNS applies a crucial layer of security by proactively preventing connections to dangerous online destinations, the community safer. The last thing I'll say about PDNS services, it's fast because it is software deployed. This can go in hours. Anyone that is under attack can ring up Cloudflare, we'll get an AE on a phone, and have this deployed in an under attack scenario within 24 to 48 hours. With that,
Awesome.
Mike,
Thank you.
flip back.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you. And I wanted to highlight a couple other kinds of ways that we're seeing districts talk about spending their money through this pilot program. And then I want to toss to Amy as we think about moving forward. So a few other ways, especially when people are thinking about ransomware as one of the key threats. Some districts are using this to roll out multi-factor authentication if they haven't previously had that rolled out. That's a really key kind of resource to ensure that even if a username and password is breached, that you have a second factor to stop that, hopefully phishing resistant. Other districts are using it for a single sign-on, right, to kind of both bring a more coherent experience for people, but also to add the security that comes with using single sign-on solutions, as well as other things like endpoint detection and response, right? So many districts have both servers on premise as well as devices that need to be secured. And oftentimes the best way to do that is with endpoint detection and response software and potentially even management of those systems to ensure that when an incident occurs, it can be stopped immediately and remediated. And there are lots of other ways that districts can use the funds, including offsite backups, which is another way to be resilient against ransomware, right? Offsite and immutable backups that allow you to restore your network in tons of other ways as well. Amy, as we make the transition, I'm going to lay out kind of 3 policy ideas that we've been thinking about and would love to get your perspective first on what you see as, I don't know, what makes sense to you and what resonates across those 3 different options. And so the 3 ways we're thinking about this are continuing the pilot, right? Do we want to institutionalize this cybersecurity funding in a way that addresses the challenges, right? And on a moving forward basis, whether it's even a new category of E-rate or it's a way that we kind of include cybersecurity for schools as a part of USF. Another option would be to change the eligibility rules under the current E-rate program of what types of services are eligible to include directly more cybersecurity. And then a third option is to create a kind of USF set aside for cybersecurity to say, you know, to the FCC, we're not going to tell you exactly where this money should go, but across the USF's programs, which include E-rate, but also a rural hospital program and some others, we want you to set aside a certain percentage of the funding to ensure that the broadband that you're providing is secure, right? So those are kind of the 3 ways we're thinking about this: institutionalize the pilot, change the eligibility within E-rate, and a USF set aside for cyber, or any other ideas you have too.
Yeah, I think those are, honestly, I think all of those are options that are decent options to move forward, right? I think that what the pilot has really shown is that there is such a demand and a need that it's not going to be solved without one of these kinds of options. Now, there are pros and cons to all of them. I would say that I think one of the things that I generally support is that schools and districts have a level of autonomy, ability to determine how they manage their life cycle and their product, their equipment and services. And I think that, you know, when you change the eligibility rules, that allows people to make a better determination of what they need and how to plan long-term about how to use those E-rate funds across multi-years. The advantage to continuing the pilot project, of course, would be to continue to say there's specific space for cybersecurity in addition to network. And I think that's also very important because while, you know, we can while it's really important to add the ability to get cybersecurity services, we cannot neglect maintaining the infrastructure that's there because, quite frankly, all of that infrastructure also is part of your cybersecurity infrastructure. If your wireless access points and your routers and your switches are 10 years out of date, they are also now insecure. So you could have security services and insecure infrastructure. So, some combination of that is really important to be able to make sure districts have a level of the capability to plan their destiny, plan their programs, and also to make sure that it isn't, cybersecurity doesn't come at the cost of sustaining the critical infrastructure to provide the services, right? So I think that's a really key component as well. And in that space, I think it's important that we make sure that we don't, rob from Peter to pay Paul, so to speak. And that there is still a commitment to quality of service for schools and districts to be able to execute on their mission, in addition to be able to secure that access to execute on their mission.
That's really helpful, Amy. Thank you. And it sounds like on the continuing the pilot piece of this, it sounds like policymakers could continue to make the program permanent with a level of funding, or kind of create that new bucket. And the pro there would potentially be like, it's using existing infrastructure, right? It's targeted to K-12. It's using a funding stream that we understand. We already have a program set up now that's running on this. And it kind of prevents that mission creep that you were describing, where we don't want to, like you said, rob from Peter to pay Paul, make sure that we are ensuring that broadband equity, that broadband availability and continued upkeep, while also doing the cyber component. And another way of doing that potentially would be also the clarifying of the eligible expenses, so that in the long term, maybe a couple of services could be integrated into E-rate, if I'm hearing you correctly, maybe more like like an advanced firewall, which is really just a tweak of an existing thing, versus some of those other things, which might be more, I don't want to say that they're less important, but like everyone needs a firewall, right? Like there's no question that you need a firewall. And so some of the other things you may be paying for elsewhere, if I maybe heard you correctly.
Yeah, and I think also the other thing that's important too is to recognize that some of these are they're not necessarily things. So one of the challenges that schools and districts have, especially smaller schools and districts, is there just aren't enough people trained in cybersecurity, and they can't hire them. They have to make a choice between a cyber person and a teacher. That's a really difficult sell to say we need the cyber person, because schools need teachers as well to deliver on their mission. So a lot of smaller schools can leverage the ability to buy managed services from professionals who know how to do cyber and who can manage their environments and manage them at aggregate, so that they have access to professional services and they're not trying to get by without the people that it takes to secure the environment as well. So I think that's an important piece not to lose sight of, is that when we think of E-rate, at least a lot of times we think about connectivity, like the actual internet broadband connection and the boxes that make it go. As a friend of mine likes to call it, the blinky lights and wires. And in cyber, it's more than blinky lights and wires. You have to have access to trained, capable people to help manage all those systems. So I think that's a key piece that we don't want to lose sight of.
That's a perfect transition to Raghu, as one of those incredibly well-trained people who is protecting our networks every day. Can you talk to us a little bit about what resonates for you in those different options of kind of continuing the pilot, changing eligibility, or kind of a broader approach?
So I like what Amy suggested. It's a hybrid approach, because looking at the the response that we got for the pilot, we know that there's already a demand for it. So a lot of the bigger districts, either if they went through a similar situation, an event or a breach, or ones that don't want to be part of the news, they already are clamoring for funds. And a lot of time, because of how K-12 is structured, because everything goes to our students, a lot of times this becomes a far cry for people. It just doesn't get funded. But then when something happens, they're like, oh, IT didn't do this. So I feel like a hybrid approach is very important. And also there needs to be some kind of deliberate effort to make this a cybersecurity effort, meaning if the grant can have parameters on what the money can be spent on, and help build a foundational element, because without a foundational element of the basics, awareness training and phishing, the basic elements have to be part of that. And then you should help build the program. Now, whether it's through managed service providers, or if the school system has enough staff to do it, uh, they all need to start doing and have a framework that gives you the guidelines, and then and guardrails, and then build your program, have the basics element, and then there needs to be some accountability, because there are some things that are quantifiable. The number of phishing attempts or whatever. So you can have some KPIs that are reviewed periodically to make sure that you've crossed from one foundation to the other. But then all this money has to be invested into cybersecurity. I think there's also a culture shift that we need in K-12, kind of focusing people's attention to it's not just IT's problem to solve, because the chain of custody of information extends beyond IT, because IT doesn't own any data. It's the schools that own data, the third party, the teachers, everybody's responsible. So in our district, we made sure that when we rolled out MFA, we rolled it out for people that based on like how much PII do you have access to, personally identifiable information. So every teacher has MFA. We had challenges. People didn't want to adopt this. Oh, I don't want to have this app on me to get the code. We made it easier for them. We did geofencing. So we eased people into it. Now people understand that that's something they have to do. So changing the culture, a top-down approach, as cybersecurity is one of the things that has a seat at the table through a CIO or CTO, is very important. And then you fund this and help them build a program, not just give them money and say, here's your rules and walk away, but have a review process and have other agencies, federal agencies, assist schools in looking at how they're doing and making sure it's helping them. So I think a comprehensive approach, this is like a healthcare crisis, the way I see it. And schools want to do it, they don't have the money. So we need to come up with this plan, a hybrid approach where money is designated. And we don't want it to, like Amy mentioned, we don't want this to get watered down to where you're going to have to pick from this or that. Because like she said, if access points are old, then you're done. It doesn't matter. So we have 10,000 access points and 90 miles of fiber. We are doing a lot of things to help protect that first and then build on top of that. So I think it's a comprehensive hybrid approach with some accountability and reviews is going to help. I think that we probably should move away from the pilot to make this some kind of a permanent fixture.
Yeah, thank you. That's really helpful. And so if I heard you correctly, because I want to make sure I'm capturing this, part of what I heard you saying is, cyber needs a seat at the table for this USF policymaking, right? And in that same way, cyber is not just an IT challenge. This is a challenge for the entirety of the organization. It's an enterprise risk that we need to kind of build in and think about. And when I heard you describing what the program might look like, if you're thinking about program design, it sounds like expanding eligibility under E-rate to include some services that are like those baseline services that you described, and then some additional set aside for cyber or some other components. So at least, this percentage of your allocation needs to be cyber or something like that. Makes a lot of sense to me. Does that sound like a pretty good encapsulation of what you were saying, Raghu, or did I miss pieces there?
Yes. Essentially making sure that cyber has a focus, and it's okay to, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter where the money comes from, which bucket, but the parameters surrounding the spending for if there's a cap, for example, that it needs to be spent on that particular unmet need. Obviously, E-rate is all about unmet need. So changing the rules for existing E-rate, it's going to make it complicated. People will get confused. So basically adding this on and providing guidelines on how it can be used and what amount will probably make it better. And having these other additional accountability and KPIs will also ensure that, even if there's a third party providing the services, they're going to be sure we need to build a program, not just offer a service and get the money and leave. So for a lot of small districts, that's very important.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And thank you. It sounds like both Amy and Raghu were speaking to the importance of managed service opportunities as a way to really help those very small districts or those who maybe are facing more challenges and don't have the internal capacity to do that. Before I toss to Vince to get your perspective, we do have a few minutes at the end for Q&A. Or for to toss the questions into, so you can put them either into the Q&A or into the chat. I see Michael Flood already put an idea in there, so I will come to that in a minute. But first, I want to let Vince go and talk about what you think about the proposals.
Yeah, I think, king for a day, Congress needs to get involved, and they need to authorize the program and appropriate the program. And it's going to take everyone on this call, everyone online, and beyond to get involved and to go talk to House and Senate authorizers and appropriators we've talked for years, the last 3 years, 4 years, we were implementing recommendations from the U.S. Cyberspace Solarium Commission, of which you and colleagues from IST played a very significant role in doing. We know that this is a national level problem. We know we don't need to reinvent another strategy. This really does require resources from the federal government. And the U.S. What I like about the USF program is for the cybersecurity grant program is that it is targeted investments towards cybersecurity services. And I think that is so important. That pairs well with CISA's SLTT program, the cyber grades program that is supporting state and local infrastructure. We need to do more on the water sector, but this is a role, this is a responsibility for Congress to get involved. So call your members, Raghu. Tough to put on you, but Senator Rand Paul is going to be your best friend. We got a lot to ask for him. And he's tough. So there's, articulating this not just as a national level priority, but as an efficiency, as a good use of taxpayer resources, as an efficient use. Those are all, I think, messages that all of us are trying to take. We can talk about cyber incident response and recovery funding, but that's left a boom, and that's going to be more expensive to remediate and clean up after an event. It's better to invest, upfront, both from a security perspective, but also, providing secure citizen services in their experience as well. So.
Thank you so much for that perspective. And it sounds like in the chat, people are adding some ideas too. So Michael mentioned that this is a 3-year pilot program, and we want to make sure that in his kind of case that we need funding to come sooner than at the end of this 3-year program, right? And we saw the oversubscription by an order of magnitude of the amount of money that was needed to actually address even just the pilot program. And so thinking about ways to re-up that, right? So traditionally, Congress's role here is just to do the authorization work, and then the funding mechanism in this case is through the FCC's USF mechanism, which was judged as constitutional. So we're jumping one hurdle here instead of two, unless we're also trying to find ways for Congress to actually put specific money in, as they did for ECF and things like that. Vince, did you want to speak to that? I saw you come off mute.
I seeing the chat back and forth. We talk about the importance of congressional authorization. That is Congress saying that this is the sense of Congress, that this is a national level priority, and thou shalt do these things. It cannot be underscored how important those authorizations are in terms of directing the executive branch or independent federal agencies like the FCC to take a particular action. So when I talk about the importance of authorization, if it's Brendan Carr's fine print objection was this was not an authorized program. So yes, it's good to have judicial review, but if Congress doesn't say do it, thou shalt not have to do it.
Right. And that's a super important point, especially in a world after Loper Bright, right? So in a world where there's less deference given to the decisions of independent agencies and other federal agencies, the more congressional clarity can be provided without putting undue guardrails, right? We want to kind of be clear about what our intent is, but also not overly burdensome in terms of you must do this, that, and the other thing, to make sure that we're striking that balance, if I understand you correctly, Vince. Awesome. Anyone want to add anything additional before I see if we have any questions and then move to wrap us up?
I just had one comment. So I think we all need to remember here, we have a group of, we have a population that doesn't truly have a voice in how their information is protected. That's the students. So we are educating them, but in the process of educating them, we have an obligation to make sure that we are protecting everything else around it. So I think it's a moral obligation. If you take everything, all the politics and money away, it's a moral obligation because you're responsible for the information of these students. And I feel that it's a moral obligation for the nation to protect, because they're going to be the future citizens, and we want to make sure they have a good experience transitioning from being a student to an adult and not have the bitter feeling that we let them down because we didn't exercise enough due care in protecting their information. So I feel like that's another perspective.
Michael, I want to add one additional thing too. I think that the pilot project obviously heavily oversubscribed, and I think that we're going to see that continue and accelerate in light of, a lot of public school districts were using the services provided by MSISAC, which were funded through federal funds, and those have been terminated. So those services that school districts were getting from MSISAC, they're now having to get themselves in other avenues, which will then put additional pressure as each, instead of having it from an aggregated provider, as each individual district tries to replicate that capability for themselves. And that's going to put additional pressure on any funds for cybersecurity that are available to schools and districts. So I think it's important to call that out, that's going to add burden to what's available for funds.
Thank you so much for that point, Amy. And I think that one of the challenges that we should highlight here, and then I can kind of move to wrap us up, is that finances are getting more difficult for school districts. There's not a question of whether or not you provide internet to your schools, right? So this is one of those core infrastructure things that we need to do. And this is one of the great mechanisms we have for funding it. And we're in a place now, Amy, I think, to call back to your initial idea, was that, the initial authorization might not have thought about cybersecurity challenges in the same way that we as a field didn't think too much about cybersecurity challenges in IT in the mid-90s, right? It was just not a topic that had been permeating, except in maybe some specialized areas among security researchers and hackers and folks like that. And I think that now it's so much more apparent that both the threats are more real, that they are impacting our students and our communities, and also that we need both the tools and the services to address those, right? And for each district, the mix of tools and services might look different because of their internal capacity to do this work. And so to bring together, I think what you all were saying, kind of some mixture of specific cyber funding as an institutionalized piece moving forward, with a lot of discretion over how to spend that money, and then expansion of eligible services within the E-rate program in ways that would be consonant with keeping the balance between providing robust internet and securing that internet. And it seems like those were two of the big pushes I heard from everybody in the conversation. And I think to Vince's point as well, in the context of the state and local cyber grant, which had been really a boon to states and state services, we really need this. If that is not reauthorized, this will become even more important. And even if that is authorized, then that would be something that this still is really supporting, right? So these things are necessary in all the contexts moving forward, even though there is some challenge in terms of knowing as a school district kind of where is the money coming from to pay for all of these things and how do we secure these systems. So with that, I think I'm going to start to wrap us up. And I know I want to thank all of the amazing guests for being with us here. Your perspectives were incredibly helpful. For those folks on listening in, we'd love your perspective as well. We see this as the first of several conversations where we're tossing out ideas of how to really move this work forward to secure our schools through a specific cybersecurity kind of program. And so we really want to get feedback from large districts, small districts, superintendents, as well as legislators and others who are thinking about this, to really see how we can help craft something that's going to benefit everyone. And again, really important to note that this is a program that disproportionately supports rural and low-income communities that cannot otherwise afford to do this work and protect their students in this way. And so we really do need that kind of support to ensure that everybody gets to go to school safely in this world where we do a lot of our learning online. And with that, I'm going to wrap us up. Thank you all so much for being here today. And we look forward to talking with you again soon.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Michael.